welcome to the Courageous Self-Care podcast. I'm your host, Christina Marlette. On this show, we talk about all kinds of self-care, even beyond what you might normally consider to be self-care. I like to say it goes beyond bubble baths, chocolate, and wine. We also talk about courage, and courage goes so well with self-care because the very best self-care means moving through fear. I am really looking forward to sharing with you today about the perils of being a perfectionist. And this is, in my notes, I'm calling this the Courageous Self-Care Festival Recovery Podcast number 3. I've done 2 other podcasts about the Courageous Self-Care Festival that I hosted in November of this year. And I think it's so important to reflect on major life experiences and to unpack the lessons. And so normally I would just do that on my own. I in fact did it after the festival, but in an effort to not keep as much to myself, I'm also going public. And this particular episode is really sharing beyond what I normally would want to share. It is stretching my comfort zone. So you get to be the witness of that and be in the energy as I do it. Okay, so the perils of being a perfectionist. When I was at the Courageous Self-Care Festival, I gave myself the opportunity to do a keynote talk. And one of the things that I wanted to share with the audience is that I am a recovering perfectionist. I have been working on this trait. Initially, I thought that being a perfectionist, like when I was a kid, I thought it was admirable, that I wanted to get everything perfect. And as a young adult, same thing. It's always been about getting everything as right as possible. And if I feel like I got it right, then I go beyond that and think there's probably even a better way to be right about this thing. So at the festival, I had a realization, or while I was working on my keynote, I realized, oh my goodness, I think that I've been thinking that I've perfected not being a perfectionist. Oh, the irony. So I thought I had gotten so good at not being a perfectionist that I'd actually perfected it. Oh dear, that is not how it works. I understand now, after I had that realization, that perfectionism is going to be a lifelong thing for me, and it's going to take a lot of mindfulness and awareness and practice to not be in it. So here's another thing about claiming space as an expert. A few years ago, I declared and gave myself permission to call myself a self-care expert. I consciously chose to teach and live by the principles of courageous self-care because I'm very clear that in the expert space, we generally teach what we need to learn. I understand that self-care can be a challenge for me, and so I consciously chose to teach about it because I knew that if I focused on it, I would benefit. I would get to walk the talk and practice what I preach. And the thing about teaching about a topic is that we get to hear it. Personally, I get to hear about it every single day. I think about it every single day. I write about it. I speak about it on the podcast. I talk about it in my talks. I do retreats and workshops about it. And so I get to hear about self-care a million times more than you do. And that is important for me because putting it in the forefront of my mind makes me know that it's important to me. Same thing with courage. I chose that because courage is an ideal that I want to embody. And so I thought if I combine it with self-care, it's going to rub off on me and I will be more courageous. Absolutely, that has happened because I am also very aware that you are listening to me and that people are following me on my blog and that when I give a keynote, I am being perceived as the expert, and so I want to practice what I am sharing. That means that I get to be accountable to you And so I am super aware of self-care. So like I said, it's always on my mind. Now, combining that with my tendency to be a perfectionist is very interesting because in my mind, this twisted world up there, there is a warped sense of I need to be perfect at self-care so that I can lead by example. And that is a dangerous place to live in this wanting to have the perfect image and seem like everything is always perfect. And so I've been working for the last several years on being vulnerable and authentic and really letting people know what's going on in my real life, because I know I have the tendency, because I have worked so hard at being perfect and having this pristine image, that I come across that way, and it can be off-putting, it can be intimidating, and it can be, oh, well, she can do that, but I can't because I'm not like her. So here is what I wanted to share with you about self-care specifically while planning for the festival and then afterwards. So if you've been following along, you will know that this festival is the biggest event it's the biggest thing I've ever done, essentially. And it was really expanding my comfort zone, or my familiarity zone, as I like to call it. I was practicing growing a thicker skin around rejection, so there was a lot of discomfort. It was stressful most of the time of the 6 months that I was planning for it. Not all the time, but there was definitely more stress, and some of it was very good stress, and some of it was not very good stress. So planning for the festival, more irony, my self-care in some ways suffered. So there was this one specific example that I realized was hilarious and very important to understand. I was printing off the programs for the festival, and I needed 150 of them. That's how many I decided to print. And I determined that the price to get them printed at Staples was too much. I found out that I could print them at the library for half of that, and I was super excited because this was my first big budget event too, and I was trying to save as much money as possible. So I went to the library countless times. I ended up wasting so much time because I'd go to one library and the printer would be out of service. I'd go to it and I'd drive across the city and go to another library. And for various reasons, it didn't work out the way that I anticipated. So the last few days before the festival, I was printing off. I needed some color pages, and I needed some black and white pages. And so the color copies at the library that I went to seemed like a great deal. I went on, I think, the day before the festival. Now, I do have a tendency to leave things to the last minute because that's when I feel like they should be done. So I think it was the day before, 2 days before the festival, I was on another trip to a library. I can't even tell you how many libraries I went to and how many times I was printing stuff off there, trying to save money. And 2 days before the festival, that's what it was. I went in and it was not straightforward. Like, the computers didn't match the documents that I had, and there was downloading involved, and it just took so much time. And then I went to print it off and found out that, for some reason that printer wasn't working. And I just lost it. I started to cry. I was so frustrated. And I realized, wow, this desire to save money is really not serving me. So in that particular moment, I thought, there's no self-care here at all. I am so stressed out that I'm crying in a library about something that is actually minor and I know will be solved eventually. And then I thought, I am usually embarrassed when I'm crying out in public. So the most courageous thing I can do is go talk to the librarian and let her know that the help that she tried to give me didn't help at all, and that there's an issue with their computers, and that I'm frustrated. So my tear-stained face, super uncomfortable, I went up to the librarian and told her that it wasn't working, and of course she felt really bad about it, and I didn't feel like I needed to complain or justify or explain my emotion. She could see that I was upset, and so I thought, this is even more courageous self-care than I bargained for. So I was so stressed that my emotions were on a roller coaster, and then at the same time I got to practice even more self-care, more courageous self-care by being vulnerable and open about it. The next day I went back. Eventually I got everything printed. It was just a gong show. And so something really important that came out of it is I realized that my time is actually more valuable than money, and I would have just ordered it online and gone and picked up the order at Staples. I would have saved myself so much time and heartache and frustration and stress. So I do like to speak about being in lack, in the energy of lack, and being in the energy of abundance. And I realized, wow, this is another place that's showing up that I am in lack. Trying to save money by sacrificing time and my well-being is not worth it. So that was an interesting lesson. Okay, I want to share something that happened after the festival, but first we're going to hear from our sponsor of this show, Julie Hodge. So take a listen, and I'll be right back.
She was tired, irritable, and overwhelmed, running on empty, dragging her body around each day only to collapse in bed. So she hit the reset button. Now she springs out of bed each day filled with energy. She's traded spending money on quick fixes for getting honest answers on how to actually live better. She inhales gratitude, enjoys physical activity, spends more quality time with her kids, and has reconnected to her relationships and herself. Visit proagingprograms.com to learn how you can too.
Okay, we're back. Now, something very interesting happened after the festival. Actually, during the festival, during the last hours, I wore high heels all day, which I don't ever do, and my feet were sore by the end of the day. I noticed when I took off my shoes during the end, when everyone had left and we were still doing some cleanup, that it was really itchy between my toes on my right foot. And when I took off my stockings at the end of the day when we got home, first I had to squeeze back into my high heels to get outside. Ooh, that was, next year I'll bring an extra pair of shoes. Lesson learned. So then when I got home, took off my stockings and my shoes, I saw this really angry looking rash in between my big toe and my second toe and just my big toe and my second toe on my right foot. And I thought, wow, my foot got so sweaty that I got this rash. And I left it for a week. I tried all sorts of natural stuff like oil of oregano and colloidal silver and shea butter and all the stuff we had in the house that was natural. I tried, didn't do anything. And then it even spread to the next toe, so from the second toe to the third toe. And for another week, it was so itchy. Terribly itchy. Like I couldn't sleep. It was so itchy. And it went on for another week and it didn't get better. And so then I reached out to my friend who does something called an Ediscan, Amber Hark. We did an interview with her. If you're intrigued and interested, fantastic. You can search out the interview I did with Amber. So she used her quantum scan box, and it's a magical box, and determined that I had manifested the energy of a bacteria, and the results of the bacteria, but the actual bacteria wasn't in my body, which is why nothing was working on it. Isn't that weird? So she gave me something that would deal with the energy of the bacteria. I started putting that on my toes, and it got a little bit better, and then it shifted quite a bit, and then turned into not just a rash, but then kind of sores on the bottom of my toes. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is going on? And so I contacted her again, and she said, what's going on is that you haven't really slowed down, which was true, And because I came up with all of these other ideas after the festival that I wanted to implement. And she said, you need to get grounded. You need to stop and do some self-care, Christina. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm already doing so much for self-care. What can I do differently? And eventually she said, okay, so now what's going on is that there's stuff going on with your liver and your gallbladder. And it is, when it gets to the skin, that means it has been happening for a really long time on the inside, and the skin is kind of the last place that your body's going to let you know before it's a major problem. So one of the things about being an embodiment coach is that I know that the body is a map, a metaphorical map. And when stuff shows up in our bodies, there's a deeper message happening. So specifically, toes mean being grounded and also moving forward. And so when there's something off with that, then a shift needs to happen with that. So I decided to completely stop what I was doing and essentially do as little as possible. And then if you look into Chinese medicine, the liver it can really hold on to a lot of anger. And I did have some stuff happen at the festival that made me really angry. And so I started working through that with the Ho'oponopono healing and forgiveness process. And in my perfectionistic mode, I didn't actually want to share this with you until my foot was better to show that everything that I was doing worked. But I have to reveal that it is not better. It's been a month. In the last 2 days, it's gotten significantly better. So the new tincture that I'm taking that deals with liver and gallbladder is really helping. The forgiveness stuff is helping. And doing as little as possible has been helping too. So that was not something that I wanted to share. I wanted it to be all healed, to keep up with my amazing image of perfection, perfect self-care. But that's just not the truth. And in fact, last week I even got sick, which I shared with you if you were reading my blog and if you were listening to the podcast. And I never get sick, but it felt like something was really moving through me and clearing out. And it was another signal to just really slow down. So that's what our bodies are generally trying to tell us. Number one, slow down and listen and pay attention. And number two, there's deeper healing that needs to happen here, and then we can use our bodies as a map. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I wanted to let you know that, I'm just summarizing in my head here, if you have perfectionistic tendencies and if you like getting things right, you're not alone. And it's not all bad. There are great things about being a perfectionist and wanting to get things right. And just noticing that there are always going to be layers of that is super important. I realize that now it's going to be something I'm working on for my entire life. It's never going to be fixed and perfect because you can't perfect not being a perfectionist. Point number two is that if you teach anything or if you feel really passionate about a topic, it's important to realize why you are passionate about it. And it's generally because you're teaching what you also need to learn, because you need to hear it a million more times than anyone else. And point number three is that our bodies are metaphorical maps. And when we are getting signals, it's important to pay attention and not do it alone. So I tried to do it alone for 2 weeks. I'm always talking about how the best self-care happens in community. So I reached out, which was also uncomfortable for me. I like to solve things on my own, but it wasn't working. So I took my own advice, reached out, got some help, and seeing improvements. I hope that this was helpful and interesting for you. I feel like now the unwrapping and unpacking of the lessons from the Courageous Self-Care Festival are complete. And next time I will get back to digging into the foundational skill sets of courageous self-care. I would love to offer you a resource, and that is the self-care style quiz. If you haven't taken it yet, it's very interesting and revealing. You go to selfcarequiz.com and put in your name and email, and then you get access to the quiz, which gives you insight into what kind of self-care style you are practicing right now. And it's a continuum. So there's kind of the level of sacrificing and not doing a whole lot of self-care, all the way up to soulful self-care. And it's fun to take. So I encourage you to take that, find out a little bit more about yourself and your relationship with self-care. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to connecting with you again next time. Bye-bye for now.